Well, inflation figures released this week finally showing at least some reprieve, rising 1% in the June quarter and 3.8% annually. The RBA's August meeting no longer looking live, with rates expected to remain firmly on hold. The question now, though, turning to whether the next move will in fact be a cut and when that may be. Well, for more, I spoke with David Bassanese from Betashares.
I'm pretty much convinced, I think the number was not great, but good enough, I think, for the RBA to hold fire at least for a while longer and hopefully see more progress on inflation in the next few quarters.
There are parts of inflation, though, that are still looking sticky, and a lot of them are non-discretionary, like health, education, insurance. Are we going to see a noticeable shift in inflation downwards from here?
Look, I think it's a tough one, but you are right. Like in some services areas like rents as well, I mean, you've got supply issues. I mean, insurance is going up. The cost of, all the environmental changes that are going on and the damages bills as a result. So it's not clear that that's going to die down anytime soon. But I think services broadly, things like hospitality, which is another sticking point in services, should come down. The wages increases that we've seen in the past few years are now moderating, so that will come down. Goods inflation is coming down. So I think, we will see, but there's always going to be some areas that are sticky. We just need to see enough progress in the other in the rest of the CPI, if you like.
So what are you expecting then the message will be from the RBA on Tuesday? Because it seems a little premature to start hinting at rate cuts, because that could have the opposite effect.
No, I think it's still, what the words that they've used, we're ruling nothing in, nothing out. I mean, if anything, they've still got a mild tightening bias here because, inflation is still too high. And the story this year has been, it's gone sideways. It's come down glacially. So the trim mean measure, the underlying measure, went from 4.1 to 3.9. So it's down, but last year it was falling a lot more quickly. The job's not done, and so it is premature to talk about rate cuts, but at least they can talk about rates being on hold, for the foreseeable future. So a neutral with a mild tightening bias is the way I'd characterise it.
Some economists are expecting a cut as early as November. Where do you sit in terms of cuts, and what conditions would need to exist to see the RBA actually
Well, I'm one of those economists.
Okay.
I mean, at the start of the year, I thought they would cut rates twice this year. They would be able to, but obviously with the sticky inflation, that's been pushed out, but I'm clinging to one rate cut by year end. And I think we don't need to see inflation back in the band. We just need to see that consistent movement toward the band. So if the trim mean inflation, as I mentioned, is 3.9 today, if in the September quarter it drops down to, say, 3.7, and by year end, the December quarter number 3.5 or 3.4, the RBA's current forecast is, then I think they'll be in a position to be able to, take the foot off the brake a little bit. Let's remember, interest rates in Australia are restrictive. They're above average, above normal. So a rate cut now is just taking the foot off the brake rather than putting it on the accelerator.
Which is interesting, because on that, how sensitive do you think consumers are to a rate cut? Does it put a bit of a rocket under spending, or do you think it has sort of a neutral effect?
A rate cut?
Yes.
Look, we get the tax cuts kicking in as well at the moment, but I think at the moment it's the other way. It's kind of asymmetric. I don't want to use a technical term, but I think one or two more rate cuts here could really tip the economy over the edge. We are at that sort of precipice. I think there's a lot of people under a lot of pressure and are just dealing with it. And I think the RBA are conscious that, there is a risk of triggering, like a sort of dislocation in the economy, if you like. Whereas a rate cut, I think, probably wouldn't have that same boost. So it would be useful, but I don't think it's going to trigger any sort of party anytime soon.
Well, speaking of, we've got the Statement of Monetary Policy out on Tuesday as well, the same time as the RBA meeting. Are you watching for anything in that to give any hints?
Yeah, the inflation forecasts are key, and that's why the CPI this week was so important, because it was close enough to what the RBA was expecting that they won't probably have to revise up their inflation forecast in that statement. And if they don't have to do that, then they can still talk about rates being on hold and hopeful that inflation will come down. So I'd expect no change in the inflation forecasts. And that I think that's going to be the key, and there should be no reason for a change there. As I said, if the CPI was higher than expected, we would have, the risk is they would have had to revise up their inflation forecasts and potentially then have to raise rates because of that.
Okay, watching that very closely then. We've also got the opposite sort of side of the stick in the Fed, the US Fed. We obviously heard from the meeting this week. It looks pretty much a done deal. We'll see 2 cuts potentially this year. What are you watching for with the Fed?
Well, I mean, Jerome Powell has sort of said it's on the table for September. The market is fully priced for a September rate cut. Inflation in the US it's come down a lot more quickly. So 2.6% is the core inflation measure. So I think, it's a done deal for September, and probably I think the market's now talking about 1 or 2 more thereafter. Yeah. So, they've had more progress on inflation. They raised rates by more, so they can cut rates by more and somewhat quicker. So that's a good news story, and it's something that, the RBA would be mindful of. It's not a reason for the RBA to cut rates, but it's a reason to be a little bit wary of needing to raise rates. And I think also the RBA is looking to the US and what we're seeing around the world as evidence of maybe that will flow through eventually to Australia.
Okay, and US elections, does that make a difference to how the Fed plays it, given, who gets in?
I don't think so. I mean, the one key difference between, to be honest, it's not a real macro story. I mean, no one cares about the budget deficit in the US, either the Democrats or the Republicans. The big policy difference is more of a micro issue of clean energy, So from an investment point of view, it's really old energy versus new energy is the battle line. So if Donald Trump gets in, great for old energy. If Harris gets in, great for new energy. But otherwise, I don't see major macro differences between the two.
David Bassanese, appreciate your time on the program today. Thank you for joining us.